Anke Ma'at, Hotep, what's happening, world? I'm a Hassa. This is Afrosynthesis, and welcome back to the channel. Today is episode 24, which is about the battle of the African mind and this silent war that is being waged against us. You know, I want to start it off by taking it back to when Napoleon Bonaparte and France moved in and began to colonize Kemet, what others know as Egypt. You know, when he first went in, he didn't take the military. He didn't take soldiers. He took scholars, he took scribes, and he took researchers. So I want y'all to peep game. This is how they fight war. It's not just about taking land, it's about taking knowledge and understanding, right? So these European invaders, they became the beneficiaries and the benefactors of our sacred documents and information, which contain our ancestors' thoughts, their sciences, their philosophies, and ultimately, right, their view of the world, their worldview and perception. And this actually is what established the beginning of what we know today as Egyptology. And so what do they teach us about our own history? Right? They educate us to believe that our beginnings start with slavery. They say that we don't have any advanced civilizations. They speak as though we are not a people of high esteem, no world-changing institutions, and so forth. And so they educate us to see ourselves as lowly, not as builders of civilization. And the truth is that this is not by accident, right? They knew that if they controlled the documents of African thought, they could also control the narrative of history itself. Because even in their history, they say it starts in Africa. So why doesn't the self-esteem, the pride, and the value as well, right? Dr. Jacob Carruthers, I want to introduce y'all to a beautiful book. It's called Intellectual Warfare. In this book, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, again, Maa Kheru, which means may he be true of voice since he is an ancestor and has passed, he teaches us that the education system in America is totally bankrupt. It's bankrupt intellectually, it's bankrupt morally, and it's bankrupt spiritually. Why? Because it's not designed to teach us, right? Education, educare or educare, it comes from the understanding of a systemized way of teaching knowledge, values, and customs, right? Codes of conduct. And so the truth is that the European system of education is set up to deform our Black and African minds. And so I want to introduce you to a word that you may not often hear, historiography. Historiography is the study of how history is written, how it's constructed, and over time, how it's even interpreted, right? And so if we have history, the content, or let me say it like this, history is the content of the class, right? It's the quote unquote facts and the narratives and the events that you learn. Historiography is how those facts are chosen, how they're framed, how they're debated, and how they're revised and built upon. And so if we're looking at this in like the content creation world, history is the raw shot, but historiography is going to be an understanding of how that history is edited and then given out and for what reasons. And so if you don't understand the historiography of which your history class is being taught, you will be misguided in how you understand the content that's being given to you and why. And so they don't tell you that they are only giving you a whitewashed version of history, right? They've constructed a white theory of history and presented it as if it is the absolute truth. But in reality, they've lied, distorted, and fabricated history. And then they took these lies and did what? Educated us with them. And so what exactly is the issue with Western education? I mean, I've said it a few times, but it's not real life. It's imagined and it is a fantasy. And we have to put our feet back on the ground in order to take charge of what we need to. And that's because we have to understand that education is rooted in a nation's identity. A second book I want to show you all is by Baba Kwame Akoto. It's called Nation Building, Theory and Practice in African-Centered Education. And Baba Kwame Akoto, he speaks and says that education is rooted in the history of a people, right? A nation's education is shaped by its cultural values. It's shaped by its ideological beliefs. So basically, go back 3 episodes if you don't know these words. Education is shaped by a nation's asili, its utamaroho, and its utamawazo. So what does this mean? It means that education is never neutral. Education is the transmission of a culture and a value system, specifically for the nation, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It naturally makes sense. If you have a child, you are educating the child in your way of understanding life and living, which would be different than someone else's codes of conduct in life and living. So the more relevant question is, what does this mean for an education system that is built on a fantasy of white supremacy, right? If the system itself is designed to erase us, to deform us, and to control us, then how can we expect that same system to educate us into liberation? This is why there's a war on our mind, because it ceases our liberation if we allow it to. And I'll repeat that, if we allow it to. And so, to paraphrase Dr. Bobby Donaldson, we must see ourselves with our own eyes in order to clear our vision, or have a clear vision. And so Afrosynthesis is important to me because truly we cannot afford to be confused while at war. In truth, confusion is our enemy's greatest ally. For one, if you don't understand who you are, even simple, if you don't understand that you are in a war, you've already lost. Because if you're confused, you can't act. And if you can't act, you're certainly not going to move in your best interests. So you lost before it even begun. For two, the one who understands the battlefield is the one who has the advantage, right? They even call it home field advantage for a reason. You understand the ins and out of the space that you're working with. And so confusion leads to miscalculations. It leads to friendly fire and ultimately falling into the enemy's trap. And I think we can acknowledge the many ways that we play ourselves when it comes to living out our confusion. If you really want to go deep on this subject, I would look into Baba Amos Wilson. He wrote a powerful book specifically on this subject, which is titled Black on Black Violence, the Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. And the book gets deep because it speaks about the many ways we psychologically distort ourselves and therefore enact friendly fire on our team. And that does not serve our best interests. So again, if you're confused, you're going to not act properly. You're going to have miscalculations, which means you're going to work against yourself, what I call playing yourself. And so the fact is that our education in these Western institutions has nurtured in us what Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois would call a double consciousness. W.E.B. Du Bois, he has a book called The Souls of Black Folk. And in The Souls of Black Folk, he mentions a really beautiful quote. He says, talking about us, that one ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. Right? So what does this mean? W.E.B. Du Bois, he's telling us that through education that we have had a white man and a white woman planted and nurtured within us, right? You spent 8 hours at school, even more if you did sports like I did. Then you went home. School was reinforced some more with homework. You might have talked, you had to eat dinner, you was kicking it with your friends, you was on the computer, you slept about 7 or 8 hours. So like, how much time were you really spending being yourself versus nursing that other consciousness that was planted within you? Right? Our African-centered elder, his name is Baba Wade Nobles. He calls it Kikungu Zungu, which is Kiswahili for tornadoes of the mind. He teaches us that the white ideology that was implanted in us is at war with our natural Black and African selves. And this fractures our identity, right? It causes us to act in self-sabotaging ways. And shout out to our great ancestor, Baba Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson, he is the author of the infamous work, The Miseducation of the Negro. And he told us plainly, if you control a man's thoughts, you don't have to worry about his actions. So let me ask you, who really taught you how to think? Because that's who's controlling the ways that you're behaving. And so, in truth, y'all, the revolution begins within, right? So it's time. It's time we retrain our minds. It's time we think for ourselves. And it's time we think with our community, right? Because the education we were given, it doesn't have our best interest in mind, body, nor spirit. And it's exactly this education and our belief in it and its lies that has us acting out of our character. And so, like, I believe when they say the revolution is not televised, because it's not going to happen in the street. It's going to happen when we kill the dysfunctional white cultural behaviors that they have buried within us. And so this revolution happens from the inside out and not the other way around, right? So to leave you with the words of our ancestor, the great Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, because none but ourselves can free our minds. So the question is simple. Are you ready to free yours? And with that being said, the homework for this week is to send me an email. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you, and I want to honor you by beginning to build with you even deeper. And so send me an email right here. I'm going to put it somewhere, ahasajadu@gmail.com. And let me know that you're ready to take back your mind and take back your learning and your education into your own hands and in a true African-centered community format. And I'll send you my starter book list, and we'll begin to really dive in and build community together, right? Because I have some works that I believe all Black warriors should keep in their homes and their libraries and refresh themselves on from time to time to ensure we're always fit for battle. And so with that being said, it's always a pleasure to gather here with you in community, and I'll see you next week. So it is, and so shall it be.